Time for another music review. I'm continuing with my purge on 1972, looking at a variety of genre albums from that year. And in this video, I'm going to focus on two bands that will probably be received as guitar bands, although they're considerably different in the type of material that they presented. They both relied on the guitar to make an impact. One from the United States will come later, but this first one is the second album by Thin Lizzy, called Shades of Blue Orphanage. A bit of a background to this Irish-based band. Bass guitarist and vocalist Phil Lynott and drummer Brian Downey met while at school in Dublin in the early 60s, and later Lynott joined a local band, the Black Eagles. Now the Black Eagles, he was the vocalist, and he was 14 years of age at the time, 1963, and Downey was later recruited as a drummer a few years later. In 1967, Lynott was asked to join a band, a new Irish band called Skid Row, a band that I first heard on John Peel's Top Gear. They had a bass guitar, they needed a bass guitarist, but they also brought in one Gary Moore on guitar, another famous name that later would be acquainted with Thin Lizzy. However, following a disappointing TV appearance in 1969, Lynott was fired by the band leader, Shields, I think his name was, and Shields subsequently, though, it was deemed to be responsible for teaching Lynott how to play the bass more effectively. Okay, so then Lynott formed the band Orphanage with Downey on drums, and then they ran into one Eric Bell in Belfast. He was playing with a band called the Blue Beats, and he'd been in a few bands and also had been involved with Van Morrison, no less, in his band Them, and was on the last album that was released in 1966. Bell, however, had then played with a number of local bands, and towards the end of the 60s, Bell then met a man called Eric Ritson, who was an organist, and they had a similar interest, and they decided to form a band. They visited the Countdown Club and saw Lynott and Downey perform with Orphanage. And as I say, Lynott was playing bass, and Bell was particularly impressed by Downey. So to cut a long story short, they ended up joining up as a foursome, and they agreed that Lynott could play bass, and they started to attract attention in the early 70s. And eventually the name Thin Lizzy was announced in February of 1970. Their first gig near Dublin Airport in a school hall later that month, and not absolutely certain of the correct date, but it was in February. Then they had a few single releases and finally signed a contract to Decca at the end of 1970. They released a debut album in 1971, sold rather moderately, but nothing to really write home about. And they also were starting to get heavily supported by the DJ I referred earlier, John Peel, and also Kid Jensen on the radio. Finally, in March 72, the second album, Shades on the Blue Orphanage, was released, and by this time they'd been reduced to a three-piece. The organ player had been dropped, and that's the album I'm going to review. What's significant about this band, however, although Lynott, of course, was the leader of the band and the composer of all the material, and Downey was involved right from the start, they'd had a number of guitar players. But what I wanted to say was they were significant as much as they crossed the religious divide in Ireland at that time. At that time, the troubles between Protestants and Catholics was almost endemic. And so they were the first band really to have a multiracial member as well, Lynott, being black, of course. And they were very radical in their presentation and appeal in Ireland. And I think it's a very important point to know about this band. Lynott, of course, finally lost his battle with heroin addiction in 1986. But there was a lot of water between that day and this second album in 1972. So I'm going to have a quick look at it now. Described as a hard rock band, their music at this particular time reflected more blues soul music with a bit of psychedelic rock thrown in, plus a touch of traditional Irish folk music. Later, of course, they stamped their authority on the hard rock motif, and this followed the release of their highly successful single Whiskey in the Jar. Although this was released in 72, it didn't appear on this particular album. And so, well, I might ask why it wasn't. But maybe we'll have to pass on that at this particular moment in time. I'm busily trying to get the prompter moving up here. And we're going to go through the track listing now to this second album. It didn't go down that well, it has to be said, after release, but we're going to go through it anyway. What a tongue twister this is. The rise and dear demise of the funky nomadic tribes. Well, I don't know where to start, but let's try and get started. It's a really funky sort of intro, pretty crazy sort of stuff. There's some frantic like carnage percussion, and after the guitar and the bass arrive, we then get some quite funky little guitar work, some of which is almost without the electric, just chord strumming. But it's a very much a signal to sort of jazz, I guess. And Lynott arrives with the vocal, but it's certainly funky. It's a million miles away from their hard rock image, for which took place a few years later. But it suggests that they were a band that were prepared to take risks, trying things out. And this opening cut went on for 7 minutes, and there was a level of improvisation, particularly from Bell on guitar, which is mighty impressive, I have to say. It's not going anywhere, the song, but it's showing the dexterity, and the track sort of indicates a talent amidst the trio in terms of instrumentation. It eventually fades out with a 1 minute drum solo, which is rather confusing, I suppose. One has to say, for an opening track on an album, it's pretty versatile, but I don't know how it's going to connect in with the subsequent tracks. But let's get on with it anyway. For those observant viewers, you'll probably think, well, he didn't look like that on the first part of the video. Yeah, I'm afraid I ditched that because I was not happy with my delivery. Too many ums, ahs, and basically I hadn't edited my script. So we're back again now with Shades of the Blue Orphanage by Thin Lizzy. We're on to the track appreciation, and we're into track 2, which is called Buffalo Gal. There's an immediacy about this track with a particularly soulful vocal, which reminds me of what a tremendous singer Phil Lynott was. Such a pure soulful genius, really. And there's a nice sort of rhythmic run to it with the bass and the drums. Some ticklish guitar bits by Bell. Certainly starts off very tasteful, described as a melancholy mid-paced ballad in the style of Thin Lizzy from a critic. And he went on to add that it would become a trademark style for the band. I'm not too sure about that. It's a mid-paced ballad for sure. Well, I'm not so sure. A soulful voice very much indicative of the huge strength Lynott gave Thin Lizzy. His sad demise, I'm afraid, from heroin addiction was very much a signal for the band to really plummet. A bit like Mercury and Queen, the end of an era. Stumbles in a little bit. It's called I Don't Want to Forget How to Jive. It's a sort of a piss take, really, on Elvis to a degree. I mean, in reflecting the vocals. Bit clunky, sort of twisted type of rhythm. But it's probably associated with the dance, which was called the jive in the 50s, if you're old enough to remember that. Sarah's up next. It's a quaint piano acoustic guitar intro with Lynott's voice sort of tapered and timid, I felt, in presentations very different to even his most eloquent ballads. There's a credit on the keyboards to Claudius Simmons on this track. The track's title apparently references Lynott's grandmother, apparently, who basically brought him up. He had an absent father and a reckless mother, by all accounts. It's sort of an ode to a thank you, I think. I'm not quite sure whether she's passed, but it's dainty, pleasant, but not that impactful. The closer on the first side is called Brought Down, and again, we've got an impassioned acoustic guitar driving the melody, and an impassioned vocal by Lynott. Looking at the lyrical content here, it suggests a male, possibly his father, who was worse for wear from the bottle. It describes that his partner, the mother, finding difficulty to cope with the alcoholic excess. But the lyrics suggest condemnation by her is limited. And the man himself thought very highly of the woman. This may well mirror his childhood, Lynott's childhood, and perception of his parents. The man consumed with the alcohol, which led to the relationship rather falling away. But there's also the cultural issues. I checked out some info on Phil's father. He was born in British Guiana in Central America. It's now called Belize. And the song has a well-defined sort of rock melody with some nice pieces of lead guitar by Bell. A solid bass knitting in with the drums, I thought. It indicates where the band were heading to. That means tight, hard rock, etc. Okay, so flipping over to side two, we kick off with Babyface. It's a pretty straight, hard rocker where Lynott raises up the decibel level a bit. And Downey gets those drums kicking ass, so to speak. Not that impressive, though. Got something in my eye. Chatting Today. Very Irish feel to this one. References to communion, the Catholic Church, and has a sort of rather folk Celtic sort of sound in the melody. Of course, Lynott well capable of raising his vocal tones to enrapture this sort of feel to the subtle acoustic guitar runs. Very much echoes of Van Morrison's Celtic songs a little. The fretboard type acoustic runs more stripped back, however, than anything that Van would get involved in. And then we get on to A Call of Police. Hard rock mould returns. In fact, listen to it. It's a sort of similar riff to those adopted by the blues band The Groundhogs. Very popular with me at this time. Although they were a few years earlier, they had that lead guitar, which had a lot of rhythmic blues feel to it, very dominant. And this track is similar. It ends with some typical sort of siren noises, which became very much part and parcel of a number of Lizzy anthems further down the road. Definitely a plus for this album. And those noises further down the road, I'm sure if you're familiar, you'll remember Jailbreak. We arrive at the closer now. It's the title track, Shades of Blue Orphanage. Clocks in at just over 7 minutes. a soulful sort of ballad, really, with twinkling guitar pieces, and the mood that's sort of tranquil and hangs well with the vocal delivery. This is up to midway through and things are looking good. However, the track whimpers out really on the outro. There's some female harmonies thrown in near the end, which aren't credited. And I also caught just a mini tidbit of harmonica, which I would have loved to have heard a little bit more of. Remnants of Rory Gallagher and that Irish harmonica feel perhaps. But that's not credited at all either. So this, I felt, could have been a much better track. It could have blossomed a little. Just it became recycled and didn't get anywhere. There may well be a few metaphors linked into the lyric, but I'm not going to explore those at the moment. For another video looking at my 1972 selections, and this is the second of a double act that I decided I'd be focusing on guitars. The first album, Thin Lizzy, you've just heard. We're now dipping into the second album of this double act, and it's by the Doobie Brothers. It's their second album, and it's called Toulouse Street. This was a huge breakthrough album for the band, and it went platinum. It had 2 huge singles on it. They got Ted Templeman in to produce, and he managed to meet the requirements of a slightly heavier sound, which integrated a mix of rock, a bit of country folk and R&B, and the sound was more middle of the road, in the same sort of family maybe as the Eagles, but not quite as expansive in terms of long pieces like their big cousins, the Allman Brothers Band. And the album signalled my first entry into their field of music, so to speak, although I really enjoyed this one, but it was the next album, the huge hit, The Captain Me, which became even more popular. A brief look at the history then. The drummer, John Hartman, arrived in California and was hoping to get into the band Moby Grape. This is in the late 60s. But that plan was aborted, but he did manage to, through the help of one Skip Spence, he managed to meet a singer, guitarist and songwriter whose name was Tom Johnson, and they decided to form a band, which then became the Doobie Brothers. Their fledgling group name was Blood, and they experimented with a few lineups in and around San Jose, and they were a power trio. With the addition of bassist Greg Murphy, they briefly worked with some horn players, and in 1970 they teamed up with Patrick Simmons, another singer, guitarist and songwriter, and J. David Sjogren, who played bass. And so this was the first incantation really of the Doobie Brothers, and they emerged, and through Johnson the band developed his taste in rhythmic R&B and signalled the beginning of the Doobie Brothers in 1970. They became a regular act on the gig tour around Northern California in 1970 and got a very strong following, particularly from the Hells Angel chapters in the area. Recurring gigs at bikers' favourite venues in Santa Cruz, for example. But eventually Warner Brothers stepped in and snapped them up to a recording contract. The dual lead guitars and 3-part harmonies were definitely a catch for Warner Brothers, and they also became known to Ted Templeman. There was in 1971 December, however, Sjogren was replaced on bass by Tiran Porter, and he also sang and wrote songs. And the initial album, the debut, wasn't that successful, it has to be said. Self-titled, basically, but didn't really do much. Too many acoustic guitars on it, one critic said, and a bit too countrified, said another, which may have contributed to the lack of success. So, then we came to the 1972 Toulouse Street, which is the one we're going to review now. Opening cut then, and it was Listen to the Music, written by Johnson. What a great chorus line. It's got a real sing-along feel to it, and a country rock classic really. This really got huge radio play, very easy on the ear, and some nice guitar pieces, but nothing too self-indulgent, and it was definitely one that hit the high spots, and great live as well. The opening cut with two drummers now augmented into the band, very much following the example of their big brothers, the Allman Brothers band. And steel guitars were also used on this track as well, and you can hear that sort of electronic feel to the echo in the drums. Both Johnson and Simmons are involved in the singing in this opening cut. The song also had a bit of banjo on it, courtesy of Pat Simmons, and I also noted the cover of the album, just a brief moment on that. The inside centerfold photos were apparently taken at a brothel in, you've guessed it, Toulouse Street. That's why they had that particular title. To the second track then, Rocking Down the Highway. Well, you know, when you think about on the road songs, of course, Born to Be Wild will immediately be top of the list. But this is very much a close second. Rocking Down the Highway. It's got a really forceful beat. There's a nice bit of guitar and piano, courtesy of one Bill Payne, who was the keyboard and piano player with Little Feat. He appears on 4 of the tracks on this album. But this is a pretty standard on the road sort of song. Great in the car with the cassette or 8-track or CD player or whatever nowadays you listen to music, possibly zip drives like myself. A great song, particularly if the sun is shining. Next up was a track called Mama Lou. Now, Mama Lou was written by Simmons. It's very much his take on their laid-back Caribbean lifestyle, acoustic-driven. It's all very pleasant with a certain edge, a sort of country folk edge. The title track is up next. It's another Simmons composition, a ballad sang beautifully, but it certainly rang bells for me with the Crosby, Stills, Nash style harmonies that were around a couple of years earlier. They came to mind. It illustrated that this band had some diversity and they weren't just a rocking sort of crew. The acoustic guitar player was Dave Sjogren, although he was fired as the album was being put together. The bridge of the song here was delivered some delicate little flute. But I don't know the credit for that particular nice touch. Side one then, Cottonmouth, written by Seals and Croft. They were a folk duo, quite famous at the time, although I'm not familiar with their music. The song incorporated some nice gentle horns, predominantly tenor and baritone sax, also a trumpet thrown into the mix. It enabled a sort of soulful feel to the sound. And there's some delicate acoustic guitar picking, very much a nice closer. And so, to side B, it opens up with a real sort of Mississippi Delta blues version of Sonny Boy Williams' song, Don't Start Me Talking. Very much a 12-bar blues, shifts up a gear, opportune moments really for the two main guys to engage in some frisky guitar work, which I like, and there's also the horns to swell out the sound. Payne is back on piano. It's the blues, what do you expect? And more than competent, it has to be said, but not excessive on the guitar soloing. Track 7, another personal favourite. It's the gospel-driven Jesus Is Just Alright, written by Arthur Reed Reynolds and sang by Simmons, and it's my favourite on the album. Pretty good version as well. I do think the Byrds version on their album Ballad of Easy Rider is a slight cut above it, but it comes a very close second. It's in 3 parts. It starts off with a quick rhythm, then it bridges into a slow blues where the lads on guitar open their shoulders, and the guitar playing is exquisite, it has to be said. I like the harmony that enables some foot tapping. It's a standout, an excellent song indeed. And just to add a little more, Bill Payne, who plays organ on this one. The percussion with the two drummers clearly reflects the influence of the Allman Brothers band, and it makes all the difference to the rhythmic feel on this gospel song. Absolutely great it is. Next track is called White Sun, and it's acoustic driven, very delicately played, soft gentle sort of lyric, and I like the harmonies on here as well. Works well, it adds that sort of folkness to the album. So we moved to Disciple, the next, and here the band really do stoke up the comparisons with their bigger name as the Allman Brothers band. The twin guitars come to light, and of course the two drummers. But what sets them apart from the Allmans is the way that the two lead singers link together their vocals in a way which really sort of enhances the rock feel. It's a hard rock bluesy sort of workout, 7 minutes in total. The double lead guitars flourish, inspired drumming, and some additional vocal harmonies. This is why this album is impressive, because of the benefit of having two great lead singers. As we near the finish, about a minute out, the second lead guitar comes in, and God, do they sound like the Allmans then. We finish with a 1.5 minute acoustic blues written and sang by Johnson, Boy Williams, and the gospel, Jesus is Just Alright. About it, Toulouse Street, 1972, Doobie Brothers. I saw this band not long after the next album was released, and I was pretty impressed by them. This didn't get quite as much success as The Captain and Me, but it certainly laid the platform for a very successful 70s career. Get to listen to it, you'll enjoy it.